Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Maybe we need to switch the title to Karen Read, Conspiracy or Not. We're going to keep doing these shows day in and day out, but we're going to get to that base question in just a moment. Apologies for the slight delay with the beginning of the show. Not one, not two, but three amazing new best guests to introduce in just a moment. And the COE was bringing them in like dominoes, one after the other. So, of course, as you all know, the Karen Read trial is now in its second week, in its sixth day of testimony. And she, of course, Karen Read, is accused in the 2022 death of her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. She is 43 years old. I get that question a lot. How old is she? Well, she's 43. She has pleaded not guilty to charges of second-degree murder, motor vehicle manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a collision in connection with John O'Keefe's death. So obviously some pretty serious charges. Here to break it all down, bottom right corner, Peter Elikann is a Boston-based criminal defense attorney, bar leader, on-air expert legal commentator, a college instructor, and author. He's been named a super lawyer in New England and Massachusetts for the last 12 years, and he's got a bunch of books, one of them called Super Predators, The Demonization of Our Children by the Law, and the Tough on Crime Myth. So an impressive person to have on the panel. Next up, Todd McGee, also impressive, founder of the 508 Group. He's a founder and CEO of this consulting and training firm, recognized as an international subject matter expert on counterterrorism, violent extremism, defensive tactics, and highly respected authority in the field of proactive threat mitigation. They do it all. They work on active shooter training and awareness, and he has been commenting extensively on this case. And last, and certainly not least, and I can tell as a Brandeis graduate, I spent 4 years in Waltham, that Joe Krowski is a true Bostonian right off the bat. I was talking to him for just a few moments. He's regarded as one of the preeminent trial attorneys in Massachusetts. An aggressive and persuasive approach to litigation is how he goes about it. A tough Boston mind right there. So getting right into it, and we've been talking about this extensively. Peter, to you first. If this is a 5-set tennis match, Grand Slam, let's say it's Wimbledon, or 2 sets apiece, who's got the lead right now here? The Commonwealth or the defense? Who's got the edge and likely to pull out this match?
Well, there's a little something in it for everyone here, and I always say, keep in mind, people have to remember that the prosecution goes first, so they get to do their whole best of kind of, and then, you know, after a number of weeks, during that time, the best that the defense can do is either try to knock holes in their story, inconsistencies or whatever, and then they get to bring their thing later on. That's why in my opening statements at every trial I do, I always mention that to the jury. Just keep in mind, we're going to go last, so keep an open mind. Don't just, listen to the prosecution and think it's an open and shut case. Here, I actually think that and people will debate me on this, but I think that the defense is actually ahead for someone who hasn't even brought in their case yet. The prosecution has brought in their very strongest argument in this whole case is that at some point she was Karen Read when they came the next morning when she came to the site, and she was saying sort of incriminating, almost confessional things that, I did it, and I'm responsible, and she was hysterical, and they had to take her off and basically medicate her and hospitalize her. She was so distraught. However, the defense has done really well in doing everything they possibly can to show shoddy police work and all kinds of holes in the story. For example, I'll give you a quick, I'm not going to go on forever.
This is a podcast. You can go on forever. It's okay.
Thanks.
We'll wait.
Okay. A number of things. For example, this business about I did it. And it turns out that none of the police or none of the responders who heard us say this ever reported this and initially. And for example, and that really fits into the defense story that you guys put together, try to set her up after the fact. And you put together this fabricated thing, blaming it on her. And they're saying, look, we had her basically confess it at the beginning. And yet nobody reported it. And particularly the first police officer to testify, who actually came on the scene. And he says, and afterwards in cross-examination, they said, okay, she said that she did it. In your first police report, did you mention that? And he goes, no, it was an oversight. How can that possibly be an oversight? A police officer arrives on the scene, sees a dead body, somebody saying, I did it. And the police officer writes up a story and just doesn't happen to mention that. That's kind of hard to believe. And in every first responder here they talk to says that and not everyone heard her say that, but the several that did hear her say it, they all said, well, did you report it to anybody? Did you tell anybody at the time? And the answer is no. Another thing, the major, one of the real major pieces of evidence for the prosecution is that they say she backed into him, hit him with her car, damaged her tail light, and later on we found all kinds of pieces of the tail light, 45 pieces there on the ground. And what the defense has been saying all along is, look, and it's really borne out by the evidence. Each person they talk to, each police officer they say who was there on the scene, they said, you investigated the scene. You were looking for evidence, where his body was, right? And they'll say, yes, we searched through it twice. We dug through it. We even had somebody go out and get a leaf blower to clear the area to see if we could find it. They found none of it there. There's none of the 45 pieces at all, these very bright red taillight things. And the argument that the defense is saying is that after they towed the car away and hours later, the police bring it into, wherever their inventory Sally port is. And for some reason, the cameras are not working where the Sally port is. And then later on, they come back and they say, oh, look, now on the ground, we find 45 pieces here. And even the police chief said, I was driving by from the street and could see these red pieces. So the defense is really coming through and really able to effectively knock holes in the prosecution's case here. And they're also saying things like, shoddy police work. The body is found outside of a house. Did you go into the house and investigate and look into that? Did you do a complete investigation of the crime scene? There's all they didn't secure the area, which might have been hard to do in the snow. And the reports are filled with all kinds of errors about timing and who saw what and where different people were. And so I think that the defense that hasn't even really been able to put on their explanations in their case yet has done probably the best they could possibly hope for in knocking holes in the prosecution's case. And again, the strongest part of the prosecution's case, again, is that she actually made sort of self-incriminating statements when she was distraught on the scene. So that's their strength. But the defense has, I think, done a very effective job in doing absolutely everything they can possibly do here.
And the show's over, everyone. Peter just covered everything. We'll see you guys.
I'm sorry I did a monologue here.
No, I love it. I actually do love it.
A soliloquy here.
As a former traditional media guy for 27 years in broadcast news, this is why traditional media is dying. No one wants to hear 8-second sound bites anymore. They want to get into the nitty-gritty. This is why my direct competitor, Joe Rogan, is so successful. The guy goes on 3.5 hours every day. So joking about the direct competitor part. Todd McGee, to you. Not one witness, according to Kay. We've got, I would say, best guest, better community. And again, 3 brand new best guests in one show here, all good ones. Not one witness has helped the prosecution. Do you agree with that?
Well, I want to weigh in on your first question. Who's ahead, defense or prosecution? The Commonwealth.
Please.
I have to agree with Peter. Without a doubt, defense is definitely ahead of the game. Karen Reed's attorney is coming out swinging. He's not going to show a big bang presentation in the end. He's right, guns blaring right from the beginning, punching holes in the Commonwealth's case. Some of the things that I think that are important, along with what Peter had mentioned, was understanding the first investigator from Canton PD had mentioned he didn't go in the house to interview anyone. Well, you have a body on your front lawn, pretty much in the front of your house. As a fact finder, as an investigator, I'm looking for every stitch of information. Information in this case leads to evidence. I'm looking for everything to help me put this story together. So I understand that they didn't have probable cause to go into the house. Easy way around that. Sir or ma'am, could you come out and have a conversation with me? Did you see anything? Do you have a Ring doorbell that we might be able to have that footage? Let them say no. And then from there, if circumstances then deem that there's a warrant that's needed, then you go in that course. Our Constitution says that every defendant deserves due process. Well, due process starts with the collection of evidence. That evidence has got to be brought forward. And then from there, in discovery, both sides get a chance to analyze that evidence. But the police work here has a lot to be desired. There's a lot of questionable decisions that have been made. And it's only going to strengthen Karen Reid's attorney based on the unconventional process of policing that's been displayed so far.
Yeah, the policing has been apparently quite abysmal. A slight delay here with Todd, but he's hearing us. We're hearing him well. So disregard that if you can. And Joe, we got to be fair. Joe, he said I could call him either one. So I guess I'll go with Joseph. Want. But Joseph, what's your take? I mean, both these gentlemen say the defense, beyond any reasonable doubt, is crushing the state, or the Commonwealth, I should say, at this point.
So let me just start by saying hello and one minor correction. I'm actually based out of the city of Brockton, for your boxing aficionados, the home of Rocky Marciano and Marvelous Marvin Hagler, a true gritty fight town, about a half hour south of Boston. We're tougher than the Boston guys down here.
I love it. I love it. I'm a huge fight fan, by the way, so I respect it and love it. Marvin Hagler, one of my all-time favorites.
I used to be a UFC commissioner, fight commissioner. So I met Joe Rogan, good guy, but we're on this show. Let's go. Here's what I'll say. There's a couple of different charges, right? There's the charge charging her with second-degree murder, which requires malice, and that requires a showing of a specific intent to kill or do grievous bodily injury. You asked who's ahead. The defense, because she's presumed innocent, is up 5-0. I find that charge personally offensive that they've charged her with that, even for the sake of argument. If you believe everything that's been said and had it come in cleanly, which it had not, there is no murder case to be had here. And look, think of the conflict. You're charged with murder on one hand, then motor vehicular homicide, which is a negligent accident, on the other. If you believe in murder, go for the murder. Don't hedge your bet. So the murder case, I've been saying it since day one in the media, that's out. The real fight here to me is over the motor vehicular homicide charge. And again, she's way ahead on that. And she's only way ahead on that because of self-inflicted blows. What we've seen over the course of 2 weeks, that they had certainly the CPAC Massachusetts State Trooper, Michael Proctor, who was assigned to the case, had an obvious conflict. John O'Keefe deserved better. Karen Reid deserved better. He should have announced the conflict, recused himself, because now he's sullied and clouded everything. Not only that, he was the one that he was in a position to call the state police crime scene services in, and he didn't. He deferred to the Canton Police Department. And look, it's a nice town. It's a good police department, but they were way in over their heads investigating a suspicious death. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the experience. They didn't have the procedures or the protocol. And that's going to play into everything. So defense way ahead. It's almost out to sea now on the murder charge, and way ahead again. She's presumed innocent anyway on the motor vehicular homicide charge.
By the way, we are very dog friendly at STS. If we don't hear a dog bark, we get our PTSD rolling. So I'm glad to hear that, whoever's dog that was. But Todd McGee, to you, do you agree with Joe? Was this case overcharged from the get-go here? Is that murder charge superfluous?
Well, I would agree that if you're going to pick a charge, choose a charge. But, I think initially they didn't really understand what they had. They've got a body. The body, again, was reported that EMS was transporting and working on Officer O'Keefe. That's the reason why they didn't call State Police CPAC unit in right away. So I think the other aspect is just really the aspect they didn't understand fully what they had, and as time evolved, they started to put the pieces together and they realized the gravity of the situation. That being said, there was an opportunity to slow things down in, to Joe's point, bring in someone that's got more knowledge, more ability, not someone that's going to compromise the investigation because of relationships, but bring in the state police, make sure that you're crossing T's and dotting I's, because now the story's starting to tell you that this is not an unattended death. This is a situation where there's some criminality involved. So again, it's frustrating to see how the witnesses are sharing their testimony, because as a 24-year veteran of law enforcement, I'm cringing hearing some of the testimony, because it's not the direction that you would take an investigation, particularly with all due respect to Boston Police, a fallen Boston police officer on their own personal time.
And Todd, I'm just curious, how did you serve in law enforcement? In what way?
I started my career in 1987 with the Registry of Motor Vehicle Police. 1992, there was a state merger of 4 agencies. And so approximately 20 years with the state police. As a trooper, I've done accident recon. So I've investigated those types of cases where bodies were found. I spent a few years, 2 years inside the state fire marshal's office. So I understand that when there's a body at a crime scene or at a scene, if there's a body, our protocol was to immediately call CPAC, the same condition as Canton Police. And I understand the nuances. Officer O'Keefe, they were still trying to revive his body, resuscitate his body. But protocol is protocol. So I've been in those situations with investigations. I've been in those situations where you have to collect evidence and then tag and secure the evidence, and then you follow chain of custody to make sure that you don't compromise the investigation.
Interesting. Coming to this with really valuable or invaluable experience. Obviously, the Mass State Police playing a big part in this entire story. Jody Arrington, question for Peter Elikann. What are your thoughts about Judge Beverly Canone? She's getting a lot of attention, some good, some bad.
Yeah, my heart goes out to her, because boy, she must be under unbelievable, pressure and scrutiny to try to do everything right. And she has had a wonderful reputation in the past. She actually came from not the prosecutor side, but she was a superstar public defender for decades and won award after award. Now she's been a judge for well over a dozen years, I think. And she is very bright, has good control over the courtroom. And the pressure, obviously, a judge like this is that this case is so nuanced, and there's thousands of little pieces all being put together, and she's got to make decision after decision after decision, right? For example, if Karen Reed got convicted of anything, there'd be an appeal, and one of the main things of appeal is where you try to find errors that the judge made. So I know I understand some of the Karen Reed supporters have been somewhat critical of her. I actually think she's doing a good job under the pressure and circumstances that she has. And as I said, she has an excellent reputation and definitely has established herself as really having command of that courtroom, I think, making everybody, toe the mark and line up in place. And even earlier today, I think she was concerned, and it was an interesting concern. She kind of pulled everybody to sidebar and was saying something to the effect of, look, this is going to be a lengthy trial, and we got to keep this moving around. We got to do this with jurors. We can't leave these poor jurors, around any longer than they have to. So don't unnecessarily repeat yourself particularly on technical things. And as a trial lawyer, I would said amen to what she just said on that, because I know in a long trial like this, jurors, you're going to start to lose them. They're going to start to get bored, and they will actually turn on the attorneys, who are long-winded, ask every endless series of questions. That's why some lawyers, that's their style of doing trials. they will ask anything and everything, see what sticks, and they'll go on. And the jury really starts to go, oh my God, why is he droning on? And we're so bored, and the technical stuff and all that. And I know that I mean, you can't always do this, but the style that often works well, particularly in a lengthy trial, is to be like a bullet, get in and out, score your points, hit your marks, and then get out of there quickly and be as brief as you can. Well, and there's times you can't do that. You do have to go on at length, and it's a lengthy technical thing, and it's unavoidable. But when you can, it's good to really, hit with your strongest questions, score your points, and then get out of there, in and out like a bullet, I said. So again, I may be hoping I'm not a little long-winded here, but I like the idea that Cannoni, Judge Cannoni is really sort of on top of all the things. She's worried about the jurors and taking care of them, and she's worried about the demonstrators outside. She did put, kind of a bit of a zone, not as long as what the prosecutor wanted, but a couple of 100 feet. And she's kind of playing all these different, like I say, moving parts here. And I think that she's doing a first-rate job.
Yeah. She's getting a lot of heat. My personal opinion, she's doing pretty well. She might be able to have a little bit more control, but I think it's also the beginning stages of the trial. And I have never litigated inside the courtroom or been a judge, so it's easy to critique. But Jimmy McNutty, a name that sounds like it could be a guy from Brockton. The non-speaking evidence solves this case. Cocktail glass in the Lexus bumper is going to be the star witness. Joseph, your response to this comment, and by the way, followed up by this comment, which is interesting. It's so crazy how we're all watching the same thing, yet see things so differently. Very perceptive there, because that's how I feel watching this. But Joe, what about this comment about the glass in the bumper? Is that game over?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, you're right. There's not a lot of objectivity here in this case. You'd think there was two separate trials going on when you read the comments from either of the sides, the pro prosecution or the free Karen Reed side. Sticking to my same theme, the cocktail glass does nothing to lend itself as evidence as it relates to the murder charge. Certainly, it's a piece of evidence as it relates to whether or not he was struck out front. I know forecasting, there's going to be evidence from the Waterfall bar that John O'Keefe was seen leaving actually holding a cocktail glass in his hand. So the defense, and they have no burden of proof, but they laid it out there, came out hard in the opening about this cover up and this frame job. Well, it's going to be more and more difficult the more these little pieces of evidence start to add up. You're going to have pieces of taillight, you're going to have pieces of the cocktail glass, and different pieces of corroboration. Again, though, you had the tennis theme, the tennis analogy, unforced error here. Call it, CPAC was called, call in crime scene services so that you can make sure that that crime scene is frozen, secured, and the experts come in. You go in there with a snowblower, how are they going to reconstruct where those pieces of glass were at the time that John O'Keefe was allegedly struck? It's rhetorical. They can't do it. I read today that they were out of there and free to open that scene at 8 a.m. They got there at 6 a.m. and were gone by 8 after using solo cups and a leaf blower. So again, still, it's not open and shut. Karen Reed deserved a first-class investigation, like all of us do. And I don't know. It's a piece of evidence. It's certainly something the defense is going to have to deal with, but it doesn't make this an open and shut case as it relates to guilt or innocence.
Beth D, and this is a little tease about what we're going to talk about in a moment. The blood in the solo cups in the Stop and Shop bag next to her Lexus with a rag a few inches away did it for me. We'll talk about what that all means in a moment. Keep these comments coming all day. Tip Knox, Joe Rogan cannot hold a candle to yours truly. By the way, I did pitch Joe Rogan. These gentlemen don't know. I have a book. My mother is a child Holocaust survivor. We started a book tour yesterday. We're going to be in Boston. I'm going to invite all you guys on May 16th. Please do. Holocaust survivor live in the flesh, May 16th. Going to send all you guys an invite right after this. Hummingbird Books in Newton, Mass. Please come and visit us. But I pitched that guy, and they gave me a pass, as they say in Hollywood. He'd rather talk to these moronic stoned comedians than a an 85-year-old woman with tons of wisdom. So to each his own. It's his podcast, but I'm coming for you, Joe. I'm coming for you, Brockton style. Bet on that. So I was asking Todd McGee, I was asking this question the first couple of days. Why is this case so polarizing? And it's an easy answer, because half the people think she didn't do it and half the people think she did. And there's no convincing anyone any other way. Now, we had Jeff Wood, who's retired FBI from out of Boston. He's been coming on during testimony with me. And he's a very rational guy, as you might imagine. He did a lot of gang work up in Boston. Anyway, he said to me, look, I can almost buy the frame job, as Joe is calling it, but you have to have everyone in the house on board. You've got to have the state police on board, which there's a Michael Proctor issue here, but you've got to have people, in the lab, evidence gather, so many different people without a single person coming forward to kind of claim that this is a conspiracy. Is it even possible, in your estimation, Todd McGee? Here comes my email, by the way.
This has been the $1 million question, right, around the conspiracy. I don't land on conspiracy. I'm seeing the direction. If it continues, you're going to have at minimum a mistrial. Then we got to do this whole thing all over again. The state may want to retry the case, or an acquittal, which is neither proof of guilt or innocence. But again, those are the two things that I'm teeing up. I think you get the conspiracy if someone then says, okay, here's what the side conversation was. This was the plan. After they left, to Joe's point, after the crime scene cleared up at 8 a.m., then we noticed that some things, there was wiggle room, there was an opportunity to maybe shift. If we're interviewed by state police, maybe we can shift the way that we can give a statement. Unless something like that happens, I don't see the conspiracy angle. We can see where the law enforcement, where the defense is punching holes, and I tell you, the investigation is giving Karen Reed's attorney a lot of holes to punch. So I follow that logic. I follow that type of mindset with this investigation. And as far as this case being polarizing, yes, indeed, this is happening right here in the Commonwealth. You have a fallen police officer, again, on his own personal time, not in the line of duty, but nonetheless, a police officer's death brings headlines. You had the recent officer that was killed by at a detail with an excavator. That got 6 o'clock news. So anything that happens within the state, anything around public safety, now you have this again, the angle of a girlfriend attached to it. That's big news. It's gonna bring a lot of eyeballs.
Every time I mention this name, Peter, the tweets come in bucket loads, and so does the mail. Some friendly, some not so friendly. But here it is. This is an elephant in the room here, from 70s, 80s vintage. Turtle Boy is representing the outrage most of us feel. The behavior of the Commonwealth and the town of Canton is appalling, just disgusting. Justice for O'Keefe and Reed. Look at the Alberts. This goes to the conspiracy theory, Peter. You just heard Todd say he's not buying it. The Turtle Riders, as they're called, and Turtle Boy messages me, and I've had him on the show, and I plan to have him back on the show. He says, you talk about me enough, get me on the show. But look, he's a big part of this story. He even went to jail over this and has pending charges. I guess two questions. Do you agree with Todd on the conspiracy and the impact of Turtle Boy on what's happening here?
Okay. I know whenever we talk about conspiracy theories and, about the grassy knoll and all that, I mean, people kind of tend to roll their eyes, and they usually kind of discount it. And how can that many people get coordinated, whether it's the O.J. Simpson case, the police conspiracy against him that was alleged, or I think majority of people often are very skeptical of conspiracy theories. However, in this case, I am not ruling anything out, because as I'm listening to the evidence come in, and is it possible that he was killed inside the house? There was a fight, and everybody said, let's put him out there on the ground and outside, and we'll say we don't know anything about it. And would that be possible? Could we rule that out? I would not rule something like that out. And then as we're hearing the evidence come in so far the last few days, it's amazing what a small town the connections are there, because virtually almost every first responder, whether they were from the EMTs, fire department, or the police, almost everybody seemed to know somebody in that house. And including, obviously, we know the lead investigator, the state trooper, Michael Proctor, also knew people there. So would they help cover it up? I cannot rule anything out. I do know when the defense kind of gave their theories about why they think it's why they think there's fabricated evidence and why they think that she's being set up. Some of it is almost being backed up. I mean, we have a long way to go in this trial, but I mentioned, and I don't want to be repeating myself, that business about the broken taillight, that the defense said, look, there were no evidence that she backed into him and broke a taillight there. All the first responders went there. They had a leaf blower, and they were digging, and they were looking. Nobody saw it. And then hours later, after the vehicle's taken away and put in the garage, the police department, suddenly they come back. And our theory is that they put, pieces all around there afterwards. And that did sound like quite a conspiracy theory right there. And yet the evidence we hear coming in, where every first responder and the police were on the scene, who were, digging and looking for evidence initially, nobody found a single piece of that taillight. How could that possibly be? And that's why when we talk about the conspiracy, I don't know if the case will rise and fall on this. There's probably other stronger evidence, but I'm afraid to weigh in either way. On the other second issue you brought up, polarization, I and many other people who are like myself, who have been practicing for decades, have never seen anything so polarized as this. And we've had most of the time you have pickets around the courthouse and people with slogans, or when the defendant walks into the courtroom, during all the pretrial things going on in the court, that she would get a round of applause and cheers. Normally, when we see people around the courthouse, it's 98% of the time it's because they hate the defendant, and it's an open and shut case against the defendant. And for example, we've had big cases here. We've had big cases here in Massachusetts. I mean, we had the marathon bomber, but it didn't have this kind of polarization because everybody thought he was guilty. The evidence was so strong against him, and everybody hated his guts, and there wasn't this debate. But I think part of the reason of the polarization is literally based on the facts that the defense came out really strong, didn't play their cards close to their chest. But before the trial, they really came up with enough evidence to raise enough questions in people's minds. And in my view, it's not like the public here in Massachusetts is 50-50. I talked to prosecutors, law enforcement officers who are outside of that county, and I think it's overwhelmingly think that this case was handled badly by the prosecution and should not have been brought the way it is. I don't think I have not been hearing it say we're evenly divided 50-50 here, but this is, in all of our memories, probably about as polarizing case as we've ever seen.
I have to say, outside of O.J. Simpson, I can't remember one that's more polarizing. Lily Rose here, very sloppy investigation. And as of today, I'm on Team Karen. I do believe he was assaulted in that house, and they threw him out into a storm. Lily Rose, I suppose, could be a juror. Joe, I got to get your take on this conspiracy theory. Do you toe that line that these guys, the Alberts, are behind it? Brockton, I'm sure everyone knows everyone in Brockton. Canton, I don't know how similar or dissimilar they are, but do you believe that the Alberts are in on this?
I live in Easton. I grew up spending a lot of time in Canton. It's a small town. Full disclosure, I early on in this case represented a young man, Colin Alberts, whose name has been thrown out there as a possible assailant. And I think there's a risk on the defense in going too far in this. I think the smart thing to do is stake out middle ground, right? Because I think both things can coexist with one another. There is a suggestion that Proctor was part of this conspiracy. But in my mind, it's more likely a conspiracy to minimize the political and public relations fallout of having a Boston police officer out drinking with a bunch of friends and having another Boston police officer after a night out drinking winding up dead on his front lawn. And there was even some texting back and forth between Proctor and a civilian, which in and of itself is unprofessional, about the fallout that was going to happen. And his answer to that was no. So I think it was probably a one-man campaign to minimize the scandalous nature of what took place. As for the frame up to protect people inside that house, said this before, you've got to have evidence. You just can't say that he was in the house and someone beat him to a pulp and then put him out front. There's not a single witness after 2 years that has come forward and said that. And we're not just talking about trained, experienced police officers. We're talking about Canton lacrosse bums. We're talking about people that are in their late teens and early 20s that were at a party there. I've represented some really sophisticated conspiracy cases, I'm sure Peter has too, that has sophisticated hardened criminals. And ultimately a person cracks. Not a single person has cracked. So you risk, if you keep taking ownership that he was beat up in that house, and the jury might start looking at the defense and saying, you know, where's the evidence? I think it's better played saying Proctor had a conflict. He had a personal conflict. He hid the conflict. Because of that, he broomed the investigation because he just wanted it to be over with as quickly as possible. Just one further point. The young man I represented, and I said this on a network, woke up one day and people were accusing him. He was a student athlete of being a murderer. And, you know, he was actually subpoenaed to the federal grand jury. He went and he brought receipts. He testified. He didn't assert the fifth. It is unequivocally established he was out of the house 20 minutes before John O'Keefe ever arrived there. Yet to some of the diehard pro Karen Reed supporters, they wanted terrible things done to this young man. It got so bad for him that he left college because he didn't want to be a distraction to his teammates. So there is a chance that the defense bites off more than they can chew. I think they've dialed it back, and I think they're playing it the right way right now. So, no, I don't think Jen McCabe, who's lived what I believe to be an admirable life and has raised great children, and some of the other people in that house watched someone get killed in front of their eyes and on a moment's notice decided that they were going to go into cover-up mode and become co-conspirators in a conspiracy to cover up a murder. But I certainly think there was malfeasance here in a conspiracy to minimize the fact that they had all been out drinking and lo and behold, someone had ended up dead out in the front lawn.
So, Joe, just to distill this, I want to make sure I'm right. So bottom line is you don't believe in this conspiracy. The Colin O'Keefe story you don't buy, but you do think, you know, obviously something went awry that night. It sounds like with Karen Reed, but you think murder is a bridge too far, is what you're saying.
You have to have, I mean, again, I certainly, I know Colin Albert had absolutely nothing to do with it. I haven't seen actual evidence supporting the theory that someone else inside of the house. Again, we've got forensics coming, so this is only week 2. But you would expect to see an actual witness. You know, one of the people, Brian Albert Jr., had a party going on, a get-together. You would think that one of those people that are 19 or 20 years old would go home and say, Mom and Dad, you're not going to believe what just happened. You know, they haven't been able to produce one witness. Again, I'm not burden shifting. They have no burden. But I think the way they're doing it now is much more effective. Proctor. Everything he touches is muddied and clouded. And in the calculus of proof beyond a reasonable doubt and the fact that she's presumed innocent, you can't believe anything in the investigation.
Got it. And I think that is probably a very intelligent approach, at least for the defense. By the way, a little factoid. The COE here, by the way, is the chief of everything, also known as my wife. She runs the show both in the home and on the podcast. She has the biggest crush on comedian Bill Burr, Boston's Bill Burr. And if there's one man that reminds me of Bill Burr in this world right now, it is Joseph. So I need to watch out. Can't invite Joseph.
You know Bill Burr's from Canton, don't you?
Is he from Canton? I did not know that. Is
Bill
he?
Burr is from Canton. You can't make this up.
You're like a doppelganger. We got to get Bill. Steve Cohen, book Bill Burr immediately on. He does all kinds of baseball commentary. Let's get him on for this.
He's tremendous.
Yeah, he's one of the best comics alive by far. Heather here, Heather Berry, to Todd McGee. How does a trial, I mean, we just heard Joseph speaking about Michael Proctor. How does a trial go forward when the lead investigator is under federal investigation for this case? They say it is directly related. I simply don't understand. Do you understand, Todd?
It's difficult to understand, but again, I want to go back to you've got a very high profile case. You've got a prosecutor is going to move forward with this type of a case and line themselves up for a win. That being said, the state brought what they thought was credible evidence. They thought that they had enough to at least bring a case forward and work towards a guilty. However, we're seeing this case really unravel on so many levels, both eloquently stated by both Joe and Peter. But Joe just mentioned something that I think is really important to understand. The forensic evidence of this case. I know from being an expert witness in use of force cases, I look at the medical records. Yes, there's testimony, there's witnesses, there's the police side, there's all that stuff that is relevant. However, the truth is in the medical records. The examination of Officer O'Keefe's body, if Karen Reed did indeed back up in reverse with an accelerated momentum, making impact, then that damage to the body should be evident. The information or the evidence that's being alleged against Karen Reed should match up with the claims of her actions. So we haven't seen that fully yet. We've seen some pieces of it, but I think that looking at things like the computer in the car, more evidence, looking at any potential damage besides the head trauma on Officer O'Keefe, those are areas of interest that I believe is going to be able to tell another story. Going back to the question from Heather, just thinking about, again, if you've got police misconduct in this particular alleged police misconduct, you bring an outside agency, an outside jurisdiction in the form of the federal government to oversee and to really dive deep and to see where those missteps happened along the way.
Very well articulated there. The question was posed in chat, and it's an interesting one. I don't know if any of you know that who was the first person to postulate this frame job that he was beaten up. Do we know? Do any of you know who first brought that or postulated it? Joe?
Yeah, yes, the information that I've been able to glean is that there was a private investigator, and that private investigator went and met with Attorney Yannetti. That's the information that's out there, and there might be a connection between that investigator and Aidan Kearney, Turtle Boy. So I think that they were kind of the genesis of where that began. And then certainly, if you're a defense attorney, you're going to listen to anything. They listened to it. They began investigating and running with it. And it didn't really come out until April of 2023. So the interesting thing is some of these people that were making statements that they heard Karen Reed said, I hit him, or I did this, or I did that, was saying that as early as May of 2022, which might blunt the conspiracy theory on some of those people. For example, keep the eyes on Proctor, but I have a hard time believing Katie McLaughlin, a young woman that dedicates her life to being an EMT and shows up for carnage and wreckage and does whatever she can to save lives because she knew Caitlin Albert and had been social acquaintances with her, is willing to get up there and perjure herself to help someone in that house, especially when she made that statement to Proctor in May of 2022, almost a year before the names of the people in the house and them as third-party culprits had really been made public.
I'm glad you brought her up, Katie McLaughlin. We're gonna get to her in a moment, but McSpunky here, friend of the show. Look at this guy. Book tour snacks or booze. I'll get booze for Carm. That is a great idea. Got to chill her out. 85. She's too worked up. She had a great day yesterday, first day of the tour. But I've got a piece of sound here. This is Sergeant Lank from today. Let's just watch. I'm not sure if this is the state or the Commonwealth or the defense here. Speaking of, let's watch this little piece and we'll get some reaction.
All right, jurors, so you're about to hear evidence of an event that happened in 2002. This evidence can be considered by you insofar as it demonstrates or relates to the credibility of this witness and the
By the way, it's not just a guess. The sound bites are long on podcasts too, so buckle in.
thoroughness of the investigation into this case for which the defendant is currently on trial before you folks. You may use this evidence to the extent that you find it credible in deciding whether there was any bias or favoritism on the part of the police in their investigation in this case.
May I?
Mr. Jackson, yes.
Lieutenant Lank, I want to start by asking you about your relationship with certain members of the Albert family. Do you know any other members of the Albert family other than Brian Albert?
Yes.
Can you describe who those are?
Kevin Albert, who is a detective on our department, Chris Albert, and I know Tim Albert.
Are those three individuals brothers?
Yes.
Who is the eldest brother?
Brian.
How long have you known, I want to start first with Tim Albert. How long have you known Tim Albert?
I knew Tim Albert when he was a kid because he was friends with a younger brother of a friend of mine.
Starting at what age?
12.
So you've known
He was 12. I was probably 16 or so.
Okay, so the better part of your life, you've known Tim Albert.
Since about 16, I would say.
And what about Chris Albert?
Chris Albert I've known since junior high.
Which would be about what age?
13, 14,
You grew up
12,
with Chris?
12, 13. I was friendly with Chris from junior high through high school and into our 20s.
And friendly with Tim?
I wouldn't say I was friendly to say hello to Tim. I didn't associate with him. He was younger. He was Chris's younger brother.
But you also knew Chris's older brother, Brian.
Yes.
Back in those days.
I knew who he was.
So you've known the three of them for basically your entire life.
No, I had met them. I had met Brian. I didn't know him other than just being Chris's older brother when we were younger kids.
Certainly with regard to Chris, you would consider him a close friend.
Consider who a close friend?
Chris. I'm
Yes.
using first names only because they're all named
Sure,
Albert.
sure. Chris and I were pretty good friends when we were younger, yes.
So, I mean, Joe, I'm just going right back to you on this. They're obviously they're obviously setting it up to say, hey, you guys are all in on this. You all know each other, small town, you grew up together, but you're not buying it.
I wouldn't say I'm not necessarily buying it. I'm not saying that they would all conspire to commit a criminal act. Certainly, it is fair game, and it was negligent. Trooper Proctor, right on down through the Canton police people that had close, intimate, personal, long-living relationships with people that are potentially involved, or even if it's at someone's house, should have immediately went up the chain of command and had themselves recused. Proctor at CPAC could have easily taken care of this. Look, I know all these people. Get the net. CPAC units have usually 8, 10, 12 troopers. Could have had it assigned to someone else. State police could have come in, taken over the entire investigation right from the start. What they did by doing it this way is they created a problem for the prosecution. Now, I guess there has to be a little latitude, right? This was a life-saving matter, so they get responded. They're the ones on duty. And in small towns, you know, my town next to Brockton is Easton. We know the police force. So it's not a complete game changer, but it looks like every single witness knows every single witness. It doesn't mean that, you know, they're conspiring to commit murder. I don't believe. I believe what Officer Lank did was shoddy police work, but I don't think he intentionally is trying to cover up a murder that took place inside of a house. And you could go down the line through the other officers and probably say the same thing as that. Now, Proctor, I view differently. I'm not saying he's trying to cover up a murder inside the house, but it certainly looked like he was trying to minimize the scandal, the PR fallout regarding what happened. That whole area, Norfolk County, not too long before that, they had a young man drown in a pool at a party owned by a state police trooper. There's been other things going on, and state police, I think former Trooper McGee would agree with me, state police, Boston police, there's been a lot of fallout, a lot of tough PR hits. And, once their name is in the fray, there's blood in the water. So I think that was probably within the mindset of Trooper Proctor. But no, I'm not saying they're all covering up a murder, but I'm saying, look, it's shoddy, bad, negligent, incompetent police work by not bringing in independent, objective police investigators.
Understood. This actually is going right back to you again, Joe. This comment was made toward you, I believe. And you see free Karen Reed as the emoji. You just talked about Katie McLaughlin, that she would never say something that, she's level-headed just to say it. But here Scott is saying, Katie is friends with Caitlin Albert. Come on, dude. Your response.
So I think she's taken a tough hit for that. What her testimony was she was social acquaintances with Caitlin Albert. And when asked to elaborate, she said, I know her. We were in the same friend group, but we weren't close friends. We didn't hang out on a one-on-one basis, which is essentially the Webster's definition of an acquaintance. And then, something unprecedented, people working on behalf of the defense, not getting paid for it, but started flooding social media with pictures of the two. I don't think any of them really negate the integrity of her testimony. I gave the analogy, look, you might go to bar association dinners with the same people every year, and you're in pictures with them, and you're friendly with them. They're acquaintances. But you're not friends. You don't break bread with them one-on-one on the weekend. So probably she could have been prepped a little bit better. They probably should have anticipated that was coming, but no one has shown a picture or produced evidence that just the two of them had been out fairly contemporaneous to the time that this incident happened. There was a picture, I guess, at a baby shower, again, a large group setting from a year earlier. But according to her, she had never even been to the house, didn't even know that was the Alberts' house. In this day and age, with prolific photo taking and posting on Instagram and social media, a lot's made of it, but I don't think they were close friends, but certainly friendly. And I think she did her best to answer it that way.
Yeah, and those photos were everywhere right after, from people like Scott McGinnis, free Karen readers who had those photos up and around all over the internet. Scott, you're lucky that Joe didn't say, come out back and meet me behind the podcast studio. That's what I thought he was going to say.
Most of those pictures were from 10 years earlier, right?
Yeah, 100%. They were a lot were high school type years.
She said we're acquaintances.
Yes. From DKC, Todd, this is your wheelhouse. This is your expertise. People say, look, those black eyes are not consistent with a injury, blunt force trauma from a car. I've had experts on who say, yes, they absolutely are. DKC wants to know why John O'Keefe didn't have tire marks on his body. And after that, we'll get back to Peter.
I think about my days as doing accident recon, and you have to reverse engineer some of these different incidents. And this is from my previous statement of the medical evidence really has its own story to tell. That's where, and again, not being in the courtroom on Karen Reed's team, but that's a place, besides punching holes in the testimony, besides punching holes in the investigation, let the medical evidence speak to it. If there's missing damage to a body, then that is going to tell somewhat of a story. Maybe not exclusively, not entirely. However, if it is examined and the analysis comes back that it's inconsistent with testimony, then Karen Reed's attorneys, again, there's another point for the defense. So, those are those different areas that, we tend to focus in on the testimony as we should. It's important, obviously, but there's so much more in this case that needs to come out and probably be re-examined. And then for the attorneys, if they're able to go back to bring forward, again, to Joe's point, to give Karen Reed her due process in court.
Perry here to this point. Just a coincidence, Peter, that every witness who said Karen Reed made incriminating comments first mentioned it when questioned by State Trooper Proctor. That's the comment. My question to you is, Katie McLaughlin, the firefighter who we were talking about, and is, serving her city proudly. She said in testimony, sworn testimony, she heard, and she's not the only witness, she heard Karen Reed say multiple times, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. How big a problem is that for Alan Jackson and David Unetti?
Oh, it's probably the biggest problem that they're going to face, that you have people like that saying that she made a confession on the spot there. I think that's clear. And again, there's the problem where nobody seemed to report that right away. As I mentioned, even the police officer on the scene gets a sees a dead body, gets a confession, doesn't even bother writing in a police report. And so I think that gave a kind of a hole open for the defense to try to make as much hay as they possibly could with that. If you, why wouldn't everybody rush in and mention that there was a confession there?
Peter, I was going to ask you another question just to follow up, which is kind of out of the scope of this, just a more macro question. But I was thinking about this because I think about weird things. But do you think this is going to be like a paradigm shift? I mean, defense attorneys have always obviously tried to, cloud and create reasonable doubt. But we're going to see more defense attorneys, especially in smaller towns. Are they going to now really go after police departments, even use these theories, these conspiracy theories, that whoever's involved in a case that they conspired behind closed doors to come up with a story? In other words, is this going to be a thesis for criminal defense attorneys to kind of, or a through line for them as they defend cases, not just in Massachusetts and the Commonwealth, but elsewhere?
I actually think that's been a trend the last 30 or so years. It used to be years ago, if the man in blue testified, well, obviously it's a man in blue, he's not going to lie. And so if it's your word, whether you were a drunk driver and say, no, I wasn't drunk, and the man in blue said, the police officer said, no, he was drunk, you're always going to side with it. The police officer is so respected in this society. Somehow we've seen enough cases over the years, whether it's somebody being, choked to death by a police officer or whatever, people tend to not necessarily automatically believe police officers anymore. And that's why you get into it. And we've seen some major cover-ups in the past. And I'm not saying this happens all the time, and I do not want to start knocking the police here, but we've seen enough examples and before that people are skeptical. If they say, okay, the police officer just testified, I just heard that, listen to that, but now let's hear the other side. So you don't automatically give it to the police officer anymore. In the O.J. Simpson case, people were questioning the police there. And we've seen so much of that. Again, you're going to probably have to have a little more than just, you can't just alone have a conspiracy theory here. You're going to have to come up with more than that. It can't swing to, the pendulum isn't going to swing that far to the other side, where if the police say it, people aren't going to believe it, but people are going to have a healthy skepticism from now on. And I don't even know that that's so new with this case. I think that's a trend we've been seeing for the last several decades.
Well, Peter, Todd, Joe, and Joel are all going to get tweets today that are going to say we have no idea what we're talking about, because we are not fully buying into the conspiracy. Samantha Morrelman, to that point, Joe, also, can you explain why the Alberts rehomed their longtime family dog and redid the flooring in their basement after January 29th? And lastly, why John O'Keefe's phone was moving and things when he passed. There's, by the way, no evidence, as far as I know, to suggest that he ever stepped, here comes my hate mail, that he ever even stepped foot in that house. There was a comment that I was looking for, this is it. And then I'm going to have Joe answer from Pistol Pete. I don't trust Joe. I'm only bringing this comment up because the first thing I asked Joe behind when we were off camera was, is he ready for the hate mail? And he said he's got thick Brockton skin. I didn't know he was from Brockton. So you can tell that Joe has friends in the Canton PD. There's way more evidence showing he was beat up and dumped there than there is that Karen Reed hit him with her vehicle. Your response to both of those comments about rehoming the floor in this one.
Let me start with this one first. Other than seeing Canton police officers where their court of jurisdiction, Stoughton, Massachusetts, I do not have a single friend in the Canton Police Department. I already fully disclosed that I had represented Colin Albert. I have never met Brian Albert. I have never met Brian Higgins. I've never met Kevin Albert. I don't socialize with any of these people. I have a small friend group, in no disrespect to police officers, but there really aren't any police officers in it. So that's kind of what people are dealing with, right? If you want to have an objective opinion, you must be bought and paid for or flawed and biased. I'm not. I'm calling it how I see it. I think I've been pretty critical of the investigation, consistently critical, to the point where I think they've created a huge problem in Karen Reed's way out in front. As to these questions, I'm not a spokesperson for the Alberts. What I can only speculate is that as it relates to the dog and in moving or doing whatever they did is, there was a barrage of attacks on social media these people have families and their families' lives are being disrupted. And I can only imagine that because the dog was being accused of participating in an attack, it had attracted unwanted attention. And I think they were probably trying to live their life as normally as possible under the circumstances. So they left that house. And what I've read is that they left the house, moved into a place where they couldn't have a dog, and probably didn't want people coming by, taking pictures of the family and of the dog and gawking. Again, I don't know. I'm not a spokesperson for Brian and Nicole Albert. I've read things about changing the floor, but I was told that didn't take place, according to what I've read, till many, many months later. And this is why you got to reserve judgment. Brian Albert is going to be a witness in this case, right? Either the prosecution or the defense are going to call him. And so I think he's in a better position to answer those questions.
Here from Mal O. Two questions for Todd McGee here. Curious if the jurors are going to find Alan Jackson too much of a quote-unquote flashy LA attorney. I brought that up during testimony, some analysis today. He's slick. I mean, he's for sure slick, and not that Bostonians aren't, but Bostonians are definitely more salt of the earth, more gritty, and he's a little softer than most Bostonians. And the chance that they might hold him being an outsider against him. What do you think of that, Todd?
Well, I tell you, he's had some real bona fides. He's had some high profile clients. He knows how to work the courtroom. Is he flashy? Okay, maybe a different style, but is he following the rule of law? I think he is. I think the judge is really keeping a very tight, and I know Peter and Joe can speak better to this, but the judge is not allowing all of his questions. I hear a lot of sustainment on objections, and time will tell. But I tell you, he's coming out swinging. He's swinging for the fence. In this particular case, as we've talked here on the podcast, he's got a lot of ammunition to use. So, is he doing his job? At the end of the day, if we want to call it flashy, I think he's just doing his job.
Lee in Maine, I'm with Lee. As much as I've seen so far this trial, I go back and forth very often. And depending on what I'm seeing, what I'm reading, and it is kind of crazy because, as someone stated earlier, we're all watching. I'm watching this trial every day, so we are all watching the same thing here. I'm actually going to jump over to Peter on this. There was a comment earlier, which is interesting, saying that they've never seen a courtroom set up the way this courtroom is set up with the Commonwealth. And it's a small, tiny room, but the Commonwealth is in front of the defense. They say that immediately prejudices the jurors because they see the Commonwealth first next to the judge and then defense behind them. Is there anything to that, Peter?
You finally may have stumped me. I've never really thought of that issue before. It is true that they had a big, and this is a famous courthouse. It's where they fried Sacco and Vanzetti in the 1920s. And they were in a much bigger courtroom. And then the defense got their way. They said, nobody can the people sitting in the jury box, not every one of them can really see the faces of the people testifying. You can kind of see, for some people, they can only kind of see the side of their heads. So reluctantly, they moved into this smaller courtroom on the same floor, which can't have a big cheering, squad or anything in there. It's just, people who are, the media's there and family members, and that's about it. It's very small. I think that it's not unusual that every courtroom is different, though. Some of the courtrooms, they're side by side, and other courtrooms I've been in, the prosecutor is closer. And I think ultimately, though, both sides I don't know that the prosecution is closer to the jury there necessarily in that courtroom. They are closer to where the judge is, and I just don't think that there's going to be any prejudice on that part of it, that you can very well see and hear defense counsel as well as the prosecution. And so I could be wrong because I haven't given this a great deal of thought, but just off the top of my head, I think that they both have kind of equal access to the jury, which is the key thing.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Sure. I've tried cases in both of those courtrooms. When I say both, where a lot of the pretrial work was done is a much larger courtroom. I don't know why the defense did that. Given the overwhelming support they have, it's an open in public courtroom, but they're reserving seats, probably more out of respect for family members of Mr. O'Keefe and family members of Karen Reed. So there's very few other additional seats. And John O'Keefe's family is sitting there, and where they're positioned, they're looking straight across at the jury. If I was Karen Reed's attorney, one of her attorneys, I would have more tried to have them reposition the jury seats. One of the problems is they're seating, I think, 17 or 20, not the usual 16. As far as the prosecution being up front, in most superior courts, that's just the way it is. Sometimes you're concerned when there's a courtroom where the defendant is positioned away from the jury, because you don't want to create the feeling from the jury that this defendant is someone you have to be afraid of. But no, I don't like that courtroom for this trial. I think they should have done whatever they could to keep it in a larger courtroom. It's a matter of public interest, and I think as many members of the public should be able to attend the courtroom, to attend the trial in person and watch it.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Have transparency. New York State, New York City, where I worked for a long time. I'm right outside from Jersey. No transparency in New York City courts. Don't like that. Mira Hardy here. Hey, Joel, much respect to your guest, but I see Karen Reed hit him. Bad police work, yes, but that does not mean she's innocent. Another good point. They're not mutually exclusive. You could have horrendous police work and the fact that she hit him. It doesn't have to be either or. This question here, Joe, you know what? I just wanted to get your take because this is important. Not only was it Katie McLaughlin, but also firefighter Nuttall the other day also said he heard Karen Reed say multiple times, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. There's an expression, whatever seen cannot be unseen. What's heard cannot be unheard either. Peter said it's probably their biggest point for the Commonwealth in terms of winning the match. Do you agree with him?
It's a huge point, but again, that's the risk when you allege a conspiracy that's overly broad, right? You're going to have to believe Nuttall, the EMT, looked like a pretty decent guy, looked like a pretty honest guy. Now, look, people could be honestly mistaken. They could have read, seen, or heard it suggested from Proctor that she said, I hit him. And they might, in good faith, now recall that she said that, or now believe that they recall that she said that. And it is a concern that it wasn't documented.
My fault. Go ahead.
There is one problem that's looming. Karen Reed, I would imagine, with the blessing of counsel, sat down for a television interview a year after this case on ABC News Nightline, I believe. And essentially,
I think it was 2020, but go ahead.
Might have been 2020. I thought it was Nightline, but if I remember correctly, acknowledged saying it. Now, she quibbled and said, but it was question mark. I hit him, as if by inflection, she was asking whether or not she hit him. But even if she acknowledges saying that, it kind of undermines all the cross-examination, suggesting that they didn't really hear that. If that video is played for them, and lo and behold, she acknowledges or admits saying that at the scene. I think that's going to be, they're really going to come to regret that video. Now, again, I don't know if it gets the prosecution to where they need to be. And one other quick point, they are mutually exclusive, but in Massachusetts, a terrible investigation, the jury is going to be instructed they can consider that in considering whether or not the Commonwealth has proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's called the Bowden defense. So a bad, poor police investigation does give rise to reasonable doubt, whether or not you think factually she struck him or not. So again, another self-inflicted error on the investigation by the police in this case.
By the way, I
Joel,
thought
can
that
I
this.
weigh in on-
Yeah, go ahead, Todd. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Joe's point, that utterance that I hit him, whether it's framed in a question or a declaration, still doesn't mean that she killed him. And so there could be a number of things that she was experiencing. She could have, on return back to the property address, she may have thought maybe while he was in the snowbank, she could have impacted him that way. So we just don't have clarity with anything other than the statement as it sits by itself to give any deeper context. So I think people should be careful as they land on that declaration or that utterance that's an admission of guilt.
Oh, and I agree with that. It's not a great fact for the defense, but I do agree with that. It certainly has nothing to do with murder. I'm out on murder, but I was just pointing out that there, that's why you got to reserve judgment sometimes, because we're really just in the, top third of the evidence here. There's a long way to go.
I should have used the baseball analogy, top third inning, maybe. I thought this was a still photo, but this is actually another chunk of testimony. Let's watch this because this has to do with the solo cups and the evidence bag. We'll get some comments and then we'll morph into final thoughts and call it a wrap. But let's watch this together.
No, it looks like a Stop and Shop bag. But actually, it looks like an evidence bag. It just doesn't say Canton Police on it. It says Stop and Shop, but it does look like an evidence bag. It's the same thing.
That's a grocery bag.
It is. And that's exactly what our evidence bags look like. So that's what I thought it was at first.
Right, except it doesn't say anything about evidence on it. It says Stop and Shop, correct?
Correct.
What do you think's in that evidence bag? I'm sorry, Stop and Shop bag.
I'm not sure.
You were when these pictures were taken?
I could tell that it's the Canton Police Sally Port. So it's some point after the state police had seized the vehicle.
And at some point after you had brought the solo cups back to the station.
Correct.
Matter of fact, these were taken on February 1st when Canton, the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab finally took possession of these items of evidence, correct?
I was not in the police station for those 2 days.
Let's look at the next tab, tab 25. You recognize that?
It appears to be solo cups with substance inside.
Are those just any solo cups or those the solo cups that you took back to the station from 34 Fairview?
I mean, I couldn't say definitively, but it certainly looks like it.
It appears that they have red liquid material floating in the bottom.
Yes.
That appear to be blood.
The top three I can see. Yeah. The only two I see that don't have it are the bottom two left.
Okay. Let's look at the next tab, which is 26. And do you see somebody with gloved hands opening that bag? Same bag, little white rag right there?
I do.
Okay. That appear to be the same 6 solo cups?
That you just showed me in the previous slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Are those the same 6 solo cups that you gathered at the scene at 34 Fairview and ultimately brought back to Canton PD?
They certainly appear like they are, but I can't say definitively, but they appear to be.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on your words. Go ahead. Sure.
They appear to be the same solo cups, but I couldn't say definitively.
Let's go back to tab 24. And the reason you can't say definitively, Lieutenant, is because there is no label on this bag, is there?
Not on that side of it, no.
There is no property number on this bag, is there?
Not on the side that's visible to me, no.
There's no evidence tape on this bag, is there?
Not on the side that's visible to me, no.
Well, let's look at the other photographs. Are you well, before we do that, are you suggesting that all of that material is on the other side of this bag?
I don't know.
And that is the testimony there. Todd McGee, you're the retired law enforcement officer. I honestly don't know if this is crazy or not. I mean, it was a blizzard. They put stuff in a paper bag inside. It collected blood inside red Solo cups. Is it insane for a police department to do this? Totally against protocol? Or some people said maybe they, did a good job in spite of the conditions. I don't know, but you're a former law enforcement.
Well, first I'll go back to my original point where this is where the investigation should have been put on pause. Bring in the experts, bring in the state police, again, assuming that we would have had the right trooper assigned to the case. Bring in someone that can process the crime scene. Crime scene services is a division within the department. They've got troopers assigned to a unit that just collect evidence. They're the experts. They would have known not only how to process the crime scene, but they would have known how to secure, tag, label, and ensure that any type of cross-contamination would not have taken place. So it's clear to me that there were several lacking resources. I don't even want to talk about the leaf blower application, but this particular
Please
handling
do.
and process.
Please. I'm sorry, Todd, but it's important. I mean, what about that? I mean, how much does that disrupt a crime scene?
Well, you're potentially blowing away evidence. So that's the whole point. The other aspect is you have to know that those blood samples are going to be tested. Was the blood 100% Officer O'Keefe, or was there someone else's blood that was there? These are the questions that come up. And is, again, Attorney Jackson being flashy? I think he's doing his job.
Man, there's just, I've never seen a case quite like this, I don't think. They also, Teresa, who watches us, I want to say Ireland, Teresa, don't kill the messenger if I'm wrong about that, but it's somewhere in the UK. Joe, to you, there's images of John O'Keefe in all kinds of bad shape. Obviously, we've heard about dog cuts versus blunt injuries from either scratches and or blunt force trauma, but he also appeared to have bloody knuckles. And again, that just goes to this whole conspiracy theory about a fight inside. What do you say about those bloody knuckles specifically? Could that just be an injury from being dragged on the ground, being bumped, a multitude of possible different things?
Yeah, it's hard to say. When you take head trauma, first of all, going to the eyes, someone described him as having almost ping pong ball eyes. Actually, I think that was his brother. When you have hematoma and brain-based injury, there's a lot of pressure that builds up that can cause that type of injuries to the eyes. As far as the hands, I saw bruising. I didn't necessarily see defensive wounds on the knuckles. But again, it's going to be interesting because the state's going to call their state-paid forensic pathologist, a medical examiner, and the defendant's going to have experts that have their own opinion. And that's what's great about the jury system. They're going to decide who to believe. I would imagine that a 6,000-pound car hitting someone with no protection can inflict quite a bit of damage. I'm really curious about, how they're going to deal with the injuries that people have opined come from a dog. Stepping back, a lot of this too comes to preservation of the scene. Well, paper bags are actually preferable when you're collecting biological evidence such as blood. I've never heard of Solo cups being used, and I thought it was interesting that the Canton police said we don't have evidence collection containers. And what was a bombshell moment for me is when there was correspondence back and forth, or there was communication back and forth between Proctor and Canton police. By 8 o'clock, Proctor said state police aren't coming. And I heard something about the snow. I hope you don't mean to tell me CSS sat this one out because it was snowing out, left it in the charge of the Canton police, who certainly seemed ill-equipped and trained to deal with this type of investigation. I know from personal experience, whenever I've had a case, including motor vehicular homicides, state police usually show up 10 deep. I wish I'd get the same treatment for my clients that Karen Reed got in her investigation, because it certainly created a huge problem. I don't want to get too deep into his injuries. Again, I want to listen to the forensic medical experts testify to that.
And Joe, this question specifically for you. Todd, just one quick sec. I'll get right to
Yep.
Does Joe still represent Colin, or was it just for the federal grand jury? And why was Colin subpoenaed to the grand jury, if you're able to answer?
So this is a little bit unusual. Look, the prior U.S. attorney, Rachel Rollins, I think, is the one that convened this investigation. And they don't prosecute homicides, but certainly they prosecute civil rights violations, police corruption cases, 1983 violations. And I think there's also probably federal funding of police forces that gives them some jurisdiction. But that was then taken over by acting United States Attorney, now full-time, Joshua Levy, who's a person that, from what I hear, has a lot of integrity, but probably the investigation had been going, wanted to follow through on it. He did subpoena Colin Albert out of an abundance of caution, like I would advise any one of my sons or anyone if they get subpoenaed to the federal grand jury. I represented him, but he did not assert the fifth. And unlike the state side, they're not allowed to have their attorneys present. He went in and sat there and took all of the questions that they had of him. And from now, what we know, nothing's really come out of that federal investigation. I don't believe it's ongoing, but again, I can't speak too much to that.
Todd, I know you wanted to hop in there.
Yeah, going back to the evidence in the solo cups, there could have been some swabbing. I had watched that segment earlier today during the trial, and the officer, investigative officer, had stated that the samples were frozen. We could see it was during a snowstorm. The conditions were very difficult to work in as far as an investigation. But the paper bag, when I was in the fire marshal's office, we had those same bags, but they said evidence, not Stop and Shop. So, but as far as the actual bagging of evidence, there's no real special, specific, fancy type of bag. It's something that's easily portable, especially for bodily fluids. It allows you to transport the bags easily to either to keep custody or to the lab for analysis down the road.
Except the optics are terrible, aren't they? Solo cups and Stop and Shop bags. It's like they're getting ready for beer pong. I mean, Jesus, what are they doing? And take that bag, tape it, close it, mark it for the chain of custody. How can they not have bags that say Canton Police Department? The optics,
right.
The optics are terrible. They belie an investigation to such a serious, important matter.
From Kevin,
you can't make it up.
No, you can't. You cannot make this up. Here we go. Here, all these I hid him, but nothing in writing before Proctor's intervention with the witness, and they let her leave the scene. Again, all these questions that people have. This is how these conspiracy, the theory is blown up to the proportion that it is blown up to. Whether it happened, I guess we're gonna have to wait and find out. Peter, I just wanted you to comment. We haven't seen this, that I can recall, in recent years, that they collected blood in these red Solo cups, the Stop and Shop evidence bag. He also, Yank went on to say, the officer, that he was not familiar, can't recall putting evidence tape on an evidence bag in the last 22 years, which is a strange comment to me, that he would not have done that or recall doing that, since police officers generally are putting things in evidence bags fairly frequently. But I mean, just like Joe said, the optics of this, the red Solo cups, the Stop and Shop paper bag, is that a death knell of sorts for the Commonwealth?
I don't know. It's the absolute death blow, but boy, is that a negative for the state here. Because again and again, we are hammering away, even just the first few days of testimony, on shoddy police work. They did not secure the area at all. People were walking in and out of there. They didn't do any investigation of the house. there. He was a guy was O'Keefe was supposed to have visited the house, and when they see his body outside, didn't they say, "Gee, maybe we could check that out too, or go get a search warrant"? I would think there would be probable cause, but at least get a search warrant. But the idea that when the police had reports, they had different people showing up in the wrong order of the police showing up on the scene, and they had even the wrong addresses written down. They had people going into the house that they were. It's just there was so much shoddy police work here that it really, when the jury just sits there and listens, and then they have the police testifying, it does not seal the deal against Karen Reed. It was earlier said by everybody seemed to almost agree that we may never know the get down and prove a conspiracy theory at all. But on the other hand, will we prove that her car hit him? We have no eyewitnesses, so it's just kind of circumstantial evidence, and it's going to possibly get down to the forensics. And I've never seen such battling forensics here. I mean, we don't even have a cause of death really here. You have the defense saying, look, if he got hit by a car, how come there's no injury to the torso? How come he has all kinds of the incredible scratch marks up and down and bite marks up and down the arm? How come the bruised hands? How come injuries on both sides of the head? And yet the prosecution says they're going to have experts that say no, he was hit by a car. But that's just one piece. I mean, can you believe this case has been going on for 2 years and we really haven't nailed down the cause of death? Most cases, we know the cause of death. Oh, bullet to the head. Now let's see if we can prove who did it. But we haven't even got to point A. Can you prove it? But there's just, and I'll wrap this up in a second, but there's just, for every bit of forensics here, there's something the opposite. I mean, one of the real strongest bits of evidence that for the defense that they claimed is that somebody inside the house Googled at 2:27 in the morning, how long does it take a person to die in the cold? Now, if that would really be very, very strong evidence that somebody in the house killed him. And yet the prosecution says, well, no, there's you got the timestamp all wrong, and here's why. And then we hear the feds who were doing their own investigation. They had 3 experts that say, no, it really was 2:27. So hopefully we'll get to the bottom. We have, I hate to use this cliched expression, battle of the experts, but hopefully every step of the way we have whatever the prosecution says, defense says, well, our experts say opposite. And hopefully we will get to the bottom of it based on if we can, under cross-examination, see who's telling the truth here.
I think any which way you slice it, about half, maybe a third, are going to think that whatever the verdict is a wrong verdict. So we'll see what happens. Todd McGee has been the voice of reason. He is founder and CEO of the 508 Group. He is a former law enforcement officer with the Massachusetts State Police, and given us a lot of great insight here. Maui Swift is one of our OGs, one of our originals here at the show. She wants to know, what about police dash cam that pulled up at John O'Keefe's home, a piece of the taillight missing? It's funny because I've seen and heard opposite, that the taillight was totally intact. I don't understand how we get to this point where something as simple as that is completely disputed. Your take on that specifically, Todd, and your final thoughts.
Absolutely. Great question regarding the condition of the tail lens. Again, I go back to, you've got to see what's on the ground, but we've already discussed in this podcast that some of that evidence was completely missing. What was the tail pieces found on John O'Keefe's body in the clothing? Do those pieces fill in what's missing on the tail lens? So was the tail lens compromised prior to this incident? We need photos, we need eyewitness accounts, we need a lot of information to just look at the tail lens by itself and to land on guilty. I have a hard time with that. I don't think it's enough. I think we have other missing pieces of information that are needed for the proper analysis.
We need more Todd McGee's in the world to balance everything out. Look at this. Shout out to STS member BWAG, I'm not sure which, who donated many STS books to SGS Nation for giveaways. A reminder, we're coming up to Boston. If you love me, hate me, or anything in between, or if you want to yell at Joe Krowski, you can come and meet us at Hummingbird Books in Newton in Boston, May 16th. I have a feeling Joe can hold his own, as can Peter Elikann. He is a Boston-based criminal defense attorney, bar leader, on-air expert, and he has plenty to say, which I love, and I hope he comes back. I hope Todd comes back. I hope Joe comes back. Peter, your final thoughts tonight.
I guess I sort of gave my big overview just a few minutes ago, that I think it's really going to I can't believe we're this far in the case and we really haven't nailed down even the cause of death. And it's really going to come down to the forensics. And I've never seen a case. Usually a lot of this stuff comes out in motions. This case has been going on for 2 years, and you work out sort of what the evidence is going to be here. And as I said, for every bit of forensic evidence, somebody said on their phone, they could see on his phone, he was actually inside the house on different floors. And do we have competing evidence there? So this case is has really not begun yet. And we're going to, but it's not just going to be based on just conjecture theories. I think we really want to see the forensics and see them battle it out.
Joseph Krowski, regarded as one of the preeminent trial attorneys in Massachusetts, and you see why tonight, because he got a lot of people mad at him, but he also had a lot of people agreeing with him. He's got an aggressive, persuasive approach to litigation, and is always producing results. Scott McGinnis, a free Karen reader here, Joe. Love the dog. Canton PD found 0 pieces of taillight on yard at 6 a.m. search. It was simply not there yet. Only one possibility. It was planted there later in the day in an open yard. Elementary, my dear Watson. Is it also possible that there was 20-something inches of snow on the ground? Is that another possibility?
It certainly was snowing, and I think they focused their area on the body, that within 6 feet of the body of John O'Keefe. Again, more experienced detectives probably would have created a grid in a much larger zone, would have frozen the area legally. It was already literally frozen, and would have applied for a search warrant and probably searched that entire area more carefully. They wouldn't have allowed people in and out once life-saving measures were over, and they probably would have done a much more thorough search, and it might have eliminated the doubt that's been created. My final thoughts. Great to be on this show. Can't wait to read your mother's book.
Thank you.
People forget that's in our recent history. Really scary what's going on in the world today. So respect your mother. Can't wait to read the book. Can't wait to meet both of you in person. Look, people can be mad at me all they want. I've been representing defendants against police and overcharging and police corruption, in asserting reasonable doubt and the constitutional protections for my clients. So I'm being as objective as I can in this case. I think what the Free Karen Read movement has done has been actually a great civics lesson for the country. People are paying attention to our criminal justice system. People are paying attention to the roles of prosecutors and juries and judges. I think it's great. But just like those people are saying Karen Read is innocent, I would just ask for some caution before you accuse other innocent people of committing homicide. So I am not against Karen Read supporters. Quite frankly, I think Karen Read's already been through enough. And given the shortcomings of this investigation, they haven't proven the case. I'm fine if Karen Read goes home, a free woman, because the case has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's our system. I don't want anything bad to happen to Karen Read. But likewise, that young man I represented was put through a lot unnecessarily. So be mad at me. I'll live.
This is not Bill Burr's brother, but it sounds like him, and I love him. Thank you for all being here. This is all obviously about justice for John O'Keefe, a fallen Boston police officer. We'll see you tomorrow. We are... we're back on Suzanne and Barry Moore for you tomorrow, and then back on this on Thursday. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Boston. Love you, Norfolk County. Love you, Brockton, Mass, and everywhere near and far between. Guest, hang on for me for one moment.